Hey, thanks for checking in with the Elder Dragon Highlander channel on YouTube. We have a number of requests that have come in from some of our subscribers and posters in the comment section. A lot of folks have kind of asked us to go back and review some of the original rules and some of the play conditions for EDH. So we wanted to kind of review some of that stuff with you. Show off some neat cards and interactions, and also just get folks who are newer to the format a basis and some good references of where to go, so everybody can kind of join in on all the fun that we're having. The first rules that we'll start off with are just general deck construction rules. Players must choose a legendary creature as their general, and players may choose any legendary creature as their general, although some choices may be met with disapproval by other players. Basically, if you check out our Most Hated General series, we've reviewed decks that are built around Raphelos, Oreo, other unpopular generals. Like sometimes people will throw out a little bit of dislike for Zur and stuff like that. So you get to choose a general, but the important thing is try to choose a general if you're going to invest any money in the deck that people are going to appreciate playing with, and you'll be able to grow and maintain your play group. Two players in the same game may choose the same general, and other players may include that general in their decks, even if it's not their general. Generals are now subject to the legend rule, just like any other legendary creature. Multiple copies of the same creature, whether it's a general or a non-general, will be all put into the graveyard as a state-based effect. In September 2009, this rule changed. The new rule that generals are subject to the legend rule supersedes the older rule. It used to be the case that generals in an EDH game had a sort of super legendary status in which they would stay in play when other legendary creatures of the same name came into play with them. So in the case of clone, I have my Doran the Siege Tower here. If somebody wanted to clone my legendary Tree Folk Shaman, what used to happen is that the clone copy would die while Doran the Siege Tower, my general, would remain in play. However, that rule has been amended, and now there are definitely generals that die off to the legend rule, just like all other cards. The legend rule is pretty interesting. Now that they've made this adjustment, some of the decks in Shroom become a little bit worse because there was an infinite combo with Sculpting Still and Shroom. There was some tricks you could do with other generals, but basically now if you have two generals, say that you're in open play and two people show up at the table with their Doran the Siege Tower deck and they both try to bring them in, both copies are going to die to the legendary rule. So that's something to kind of consider. If you pick a general, you might even want to try to track down somebody that's fairly unique, and you can get around that problem. To kind of quote the rules, the general is the principle around which an EDH deck is built. It's more easily available than other cards in the deck, and EDH decks will usually want to leverage their general strengths in the overall plan of the deck. It's not, however, guaranteed to be available at every point in the game, so EDH decks should be able to function without their general for a time. Some examples of when that general might become unavailable is if the general is put back into your hand or if it's shuffled into your deck. Now that you understand the general rule, it's kind of time to talk about like the second most important thing in building with the EDH deck. The general's mana cost is going to define what color of mana symbols may appear in the cards that you use in your deck. Colored mana symbols which appear in an EDH deck are restricted to the colors appearing in the general's mana cost. So in our example of Doran the Siege Tower, if we look up at the mana, we can run black, green, and white. All the cards in the deck that I can play have to have black, green, or white. This would mean that I couldn't play cards that have any red or any blue. Here are a few examples of cards that would fit perfectly within my general's deck. I could play Damnation, has two colorless and two black. I could play the new Epic, Rampaging Baloths, has 2 green and colorless. I could also run Revlark because of the white mana cost. Some non-examples of cards that would not work in this deck would be Negate because of the blue cost in the mana. We couldn't run Trace of Abundance because the split mana symbol is red and white, and anywhere on the card, if there's a red mana symbol, that's going to rule it out for play with my general. An example that would work would be the split cost of Sapling of Kolfener. This has the green-black split mana symbol, and therefore it's going to work just fine because I have both those colors, green and black, with Endoran. This card's not going to work because it's a WoW card, and Spectral Tiger probably wouldn't work that well with Doran anyways. Other cards that would fit nicely into a deck would be cards that have any other combination of mana that are contained within my general's colors. So in this case, we see Lord of Extinction has both black and green, or Mirari's Wake has both green and white. So those cards in any color combination are going to work because they fall under Doran the Siege Tower's color restrictions. A land whose type includes swamp, islands, plains, forests, and or mountains, for example, basic lands, shock lands, dual lands, the Shadowmoor filter lands, do contain the corresponding mana symbol. As such, they cannot appear in the deck unless the general has those corresponding colors. So some examples are Treetop Village. Treetop Village contains a forest, so that one's going to work for our deck. Swamp is going to work because we see the black mana symbol, and Plains are going to work because they share the white mana symbol with the general. Cards that wouldn't work would be anything that has a mountain in it, or anything that displays an island symbol. A couple of interesting scenarios that come up. When you're making your deck, you can play any of the fetch lands. The fetch lands don't actually display the swamp, island, plains, forest, or mountain. They might say those words, but basically you can use any of the fetches because they don't display the mana symbol. Another thing that comes up sometimes is artifacts. Artifacts are colorless, and they will fit in any of the EDH decks. An additional rule to look out for is a deck may not generate mana outside of its primary colors. If an effect would generate mana of an illegal color, it would generate colorless mana instead. So, in the case of Darksteel Ignite, you can produce 1 mana of any color in your mana pool, but if you're running Doran, you can only make black, green, white, or colorless. Imagine, if you will, that you were playing a deck outside of the Doran colors, maybe running a Rayo in a straight blue deck, and somebody dropped a card like Contamination. Contamination says whenever a land is tapped for mana, it produces black instead of its normal type and amount. This would essentially result in our mono blue deck tapping islands for colorless mana. An EDH deck must contain exactly 100 cards, including the general. Once you consider the legend, you have 99 other cards from which to build. With the exception of basic land, no 2 cards in the deck may have the same English name. EDH is played with vintage legal cards with 2 exceptions. Cards are legal as of their set's pre-release, and Shahrazad is legal for play in EDH.